The penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel, suspended over a city that Marco Bellini owned but never saw. His world was the hushed quiet of this room. The scent of antiseptic and old roses. The rhythmic, gentle breathing of the woman in the bed. His mother, Sophia. Her mind was a flickering candle in a storm, moments of light swallowed by long stretches of darkness. Marco was her anchor. He was the one constant, the face she sometimes knew. He sat in a leather chair, a relic from a life before this one, watching the rise and fall of her chest. The city lights were a cold, distant fire on the other side of the floor-to-ceiling windows. His men, Leo and Santino, stood like statues by the door. Always there. Always silent. The agency had promised their best. Another nurse. The fourth one this year. They never lasted. They were scared of him, or unnerved by the silence, or simply not good enough for Sophia. Marco was unforgiving in his standards for her care. A soft chime from the private elevator announced the arrival. Leo nodded once. "She is here, boss." Marco did not turn. His gaze remained on his mother. "Let her in." The door opened with a quiet click. Footsteps, soft and hesitant, on the marble floor. A woman appeared at the edge of his vision. She was of medium height, dressed in simple navy scrubs. Her hair was tied back, and her face was professional, calm, but etched with a tiredness he recognized. It was the look of someone who had seen too much of life's quiet sorrows. She stopped a respectful distance away, waiting. He hated this part. The introductions. The false deference. He finally turned his head, his eyes like chips of granite. "You are the new nurse." It was a statement, not a question. She met his gaze without flinching. "Yes. My name is Ilara Vance." He gave a curt nod. "My mother is Sophia. She has good days and bad. Today is a quiet day. Do not agitate her." The last one spoke too loudly. "I understand," she said. Her voice was low. "Professional. Nothing special." He waved a hand dismissively toward the bed, a gesture for her to begin. He was about to turn back to the window, to retreat into his silent vigil. Ilara moved past him. She knelt beside the bed, not looking at Sophia as a patient, but as a person. She gently took the old woman's frail hand in hers. "Hello, Sophia," the nurse whispered, her voice softening with a warmth that filled the sterile room. "My name is Ilara. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm here to help." The sound. That voice. It was not the professional tone from before. This was different. It was a melody he had not heard in 25 years. A sound he had buried under a mountain of concrete and blood and time. A ghost singing in the tomb of his heart. The crystal glass of water in his hand slipped. It did not shatter. It hit the thick Persian rug with a dull, heavy thud. Water darkened the deep crimson threads. Leo and Santino tensed instantly. Their hands moved to the jackets of their suits. Their eyes darted around the room, searching for a threat. There was none. There was only the nurse, his mother, and their boss, who was frozen. Marco Bellini, the man they called the Ghost, the man who had faced down assassins and traitors without a flicker of emotion, was staring at the nurse's back. His face, a mask of cold control for a quarter of a century, had cracked. He could not breathe. Elena. The name was a wound that had never healed. He felt a tremor start in his hands. He saw Leo take a half step forward, his brow furrowed in confusion and concern. Marco raised a single, trembling hand. A gesture. A command. "Stand down," he managed to say, his own voice a rasp he did not recognize. He pushed himself to his feet, his legs unsteady. The room seemed to tilt. He felt dizzy, as if the fortress he had built around himself was crumbling to dust, and he was falling through the floors, through the years, back to a summer night and a promise made under a sky full of stars. He fell. Not to the floor. He caught himself on the arm of the chair, his knuckles white. But inside, he was on his knees. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next will redefine the meaning of a second chance. Now, if you enjoy stories that touch the heart, make sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button so you never miss an update. And let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching from. We love to see how far our stories travel. Now, let's get into it. Marco Bellini was not a man given to ghosts. He dealt in the tangible world of power, fear, and loyalty. His empire was built on the waterfront, on the quiet, orderly movement of goods in and out of the city. He was a businessman whose negotiations were final and whose contracts were sealed with a handshake that carried the weight of a death sentence. They called him the Ghost because his enemies disappeared, and his presence was felt long after he had left a room. He was a whisper. A legend. A predator who had long ago shed the skin of the boy he once was. That boy had loved a girl named Elena. She was not from his world. She was the daughter of a baker, a girl who smelled of flour and sunshine. She had a laugh that could chase away shadows and a voice that sounded like a half-remembered song. They met by accident. A fender bender on a rain-slicked street. He had been young then, just starting to learn his father's business, still more boy than monster. He had expected her to be afraid. Instead, she had yelled at him for scratching the paint on her father's old delivery van. He was instantly captivated. Their love was a secret garden in the middle of a war zone. For 2 years, he lived a double life. By day, he was the heir to a dangerous throne. By night, he was just Marco, a boy in love with a girl who saw the good in him he thought he had already lost. He promised her a different life. A house by the sea, far from the city, far from the whispers and the violence. He bought her a ring. A simple sapphire, the color of her eyes. Then, one night, she was gone. There was a note on the table of their small, secret apartment. The handwriting was hers, but the words were a stranger's. I can't do this. This world, it's too much. I'm sorry. Don't look for me. He had looked. He had torn the city apart. He used all the power his father had, all the fear his name commanded. He searched for weeks, then months. He found nothing. It was as if she had dissolved into thin air. The pain of it hollowed him out. The love was cauterized, burned away, leaving behind only scar tissue and a cold, hard resolve. He decided that day that love was a liability. A weakness. He would never allow himself to be that vulnerable again. He became the Ghost. Now, 25 years later, a nurse named Ilara Vance was kneeling by his mother's bed, and her voice was a key turning a lock he had forgotten existed. He watched her, his mind reeling. He studied her. The way she moved. The gentle efficiency of her hands as she checked his mother's pulse, smoothed the blankets. She was older now, of course. The woman he remembered was barely 20. This woman was in her mid-40s. There were fine lines around her eyes, a whisper of silver in the dark hair pulled back from her face. But the shape of her face, the curve of her neck, it was familiar. Hauntingly familiar. He had to know. But he could not ask. To ask was to reveal the crack in his armor. To show the wound that had never closed. His world did not allow for such weakness. A hint of it could be fatal. His rivals were like sharks, always circling, smelling for blood in the water. He retreated. He walked silently from the room, past his bewildered men, and into his office. It was a space as cold and Spartan as he was. A large desk of dark wood. A single chair. No photos. No mementos. Nothing personal. Nothing to betray the man behind the myth. He stood at the window, looking down at the city. His city. He had conquered it, but for what? To sit alone in a glass tower, guarding the fading memories of his mother while his own had come back to haunt him. Leo, he said, his voice low and steady once more. The mask was back in place. His lieutenant appeared at the door instantly. Boss? The nurse. Ilara Vance. I want to know everything about her. Leah's expression was carefully neutral, but Marco saw the flicker of surprise. He never took a personal interest in the staff. They were functional. Replaceable. Everything? Leo asked, probing gently. Where she was born. Where she went to school. Every job she has ever had. Every place she has ever lived. I want to know the name of the dog she had when she was 10, if she had one. Be discreet. No one can know we are looking. Especially not her. Understood, boss, Leo said. He hesitated for a moment. Is there a problem? Marco turned from the window, his eyes unreadable. I do not like surprises, Leo. And I do not believe in ghosts. For the next 2 days, Marco was a phantom in his own home. He avoided his mother's room when the nurse was there. But he could not escape her. He would hear the low murmur of her voice from down the hall, and the sound would stop him in his tracks. He watched her on the security monitors, a grid of silent, black and white images on the screen in his office. He observed her routine. She was meticulous. Gentle. She would read to his mother from books of poetry. She would talk to her, not as if she were an invalid, but as if she were a friend, telling her about the weather, about a bird she saw on the balcony. And sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, he saw her stand by the window, looking out at the sea with a profound sadness in her eyes. A loneliness that mirrored his own. Who was she? Was it possible? Could she have changed her name, built a new life? But why? Why leave him only to reappear 25 years later as a nurse for his mother? It made no sense. It felt like a trap. A carefully constructed play designed to get to him. He thought of his enemies. Silvio Rizzio, mainly. An old snake who had been quiet for years but was rumored to be making moves again. Rizzio was clever. He knew Marco's history. He knew about Elena. Would he be audacious enough to find a woman who looked and sounded like her, to plant her in Marco's home as a psychological weapon? The thought was chilling. It was exactly the kind of move Rizzio would make. Cruel. Personal. On the 3rd day, Leo returned. He stood before Marco's desk and placed a thin file on the polished wood. Ilara Vance, Leo began, his voice flat, professional. Born 44 years ago in Portland, Oregon. Only child. Parents died in a car accident when she was 19. She attended nursing school at Oregon Health and Science University. Graduated with honors. Worked at a hospice in Portland for 15 years. Moved here 2 years ago. Lived in a small apartment in the suburbs. Her record is spotless. No debts, no criminal history, no known associates in our world. She's just a nurse. Marco stared at the file. Portland. Not here. Parents died at 19. Elena's parents had been alive and well when she disappeared. It was not her. It could not be her. It was a coincidence. A cruel, impossible coincidence. There is one thing, Leo added, his voice dropping slightly. Marco looked up. What? There's a gap. After her parents' accident. She was 19. She doesn't show up again on any official records, school, work, residence, for almost 2 years. It's like she vanished. 19. The same age Elena was when she left him. A 2-year gap. The air in the room grew thick. Marco felt the cold dread mix with a spark of impossible hope. He opened the file. Inside was a single photograph, a copy of her nursing license ID. The face was older, the expression tired, but the eyes, he would know those eyes anywhere. He felt the floor drop out from under him again. He had to make a choice. He could fire her. Send her away. Banish the ghost and restore the cold, silent order of his life. It was the smart move. The safe move. The ghost would have done it without a second thought. But the man, the boy who still lived somewhere inside him, could not. He was tired of being a ghost. He closed the file. His decision was made. He would not run from this. He would face it. He would walk into that room, and he would listen to her voice, and he would find the truth, no matter what it cost him. Leo, Marco said, his voice quiet but firm, resonating with a finality that left no room for argument. Triple the security on this floor. No one gets in or out of this building without my express permission. Put a watch on her apartment. A discreet one. I want to know if she so much as buys a carton of milk. And I want you to start digging into Silvio Rizzio. I want to know where he has been for the last 25 years. Leo's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. This was more than a background check. This was a protocol for a high-level threat. He was putting the fortress on lockdown because of a nurse. Boss, are you sure? Marco stood up and walked to the window, his back to his lieutenant. The city lights blurred into a sea of fractured diamonds. She is not to be harmed. She is not to be approached. She is not to be frightened. She is to be protected. Is that understood? Yes, boss. Perfectly. She is under my protection now, Marco said, more to himself than to Leo. It was a vow. A promise made across a quarter of a century of silence. He didn't know if she was Elena. He didn't know if this was a trap. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he would not lose her again. He had to get closer. He had to hear her speak to him, not just to his mother. He needed to look into her eyes and see if he could find a flicker of recognition, a shadow of the girl he once knew. The internal battle was fierce. The cold, calculating mind of the ghost screamed at him to eliminate the variable, to cut out the emotional cancer before it could spread. It was a risk, an unacceptable one. She could be a spy, a plant, an assassin in a nurse's uniform. His empire was built on the foundation of paranoia, and every instinct honed by decades of survival told him to push her away. But the other part of him, the part he had thought long dead, was stronger. It was a desperate, aching need for connection, for a piece of his own lost humanity. It was the memory of her laughter, the warmth of her hand in his. He had lived in a black and white world for so long, and her voice had brought color flooding back in. He could not, would not, go back to the gray. He made his move that evening. He waited until she was finishing her shift. He heard her soft goodbyes to his mother, the rustle of her jacket as she prepared to leave. He stepped out of his office and stood in the hallway, blocking her path to the elevator. She stopped short when she saw him. A flicker of surprise, maybe apprehension, crossed her face. Mr. Bellini. He took a step closer, his presence seeming to suck the air out of the wide corridor. He kept his expression neutral, his voice low. You are doing good work with my mother. She seems calmer. She's a lovely woman, Ilara said, her gaze steady. She just needs patience. Someone to listen. There it was again. The voice. Up close, without the filter of a security monitor or the distance of a hallway, it was even more potent. It vibrated through him, a physical sensation. He had to fight to keep his composure. She mentioned you read poetry to her, he said, the words feeling clumsy in his mouth. He never made small talk. Yes. Rilke. She seems to respond to it. Rilke. Elena had loved Rilke. She used to read his poems to him in their secret apartment, her voice weaving a spell around them. Another coincidence? The world was not that cruel. Or was it? My mother, she was a teacher, Marco found himself saying, revealing a piece of personal history he shared with no one. She loved books. A small, sad smile touched Ilara's lips. It transformed her face, erasing some of the weariness. I can tell. There's a light in her eyes when I read. A memory of a memory, perhaps. He saw it then. In that smile. A ghost of the girl who had yelled at him about a scratch on a van. He felt a sharp, stabbing pain in his chest, so intense it almost made him gasp. "I would like to offer you a permanent position," he said, the decision solidifying in an instant. "Live in. Here. In the penthouse. A suite would be prepared for you. The salary would be considerable." He needed her close. Where he could watch her. Where he could protect her. Ilara's smile faded. She seemed taken aback, her professional calm wavering. "That's a very generous offer, Mr. Bellini. But I have an apartment. A life. Your life would not be interrupted. A car would be at your disposal. You would have days off, of course. But my mother's condition is deteriorating. I want consistency for her. The best care. You are the best I have seen." It was the truth, but it was also the perfect excuse. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. He saw a conflict in her eyes. A hesitation that seemed to go deeper than just a career choice. I would need to think about it." "Of course," he said, though his every instinct screamed at him to demand she accept. To force the issue. But he couldn't. Not with her. "Take your time. Let me know tomorrow." He stepped aside, clearing her path to the elevator. She gave him a small, uncertain nod and walked past. As the elevator doors slid shut, he was left alone in the hallway, the faint scent of her simple, clean soap lingering in the air. He had offered her a gilded cage. He hoped she would fly into it. The next morning, Ilara accepted the offer. Her reasons, she explained, were practical. The salary would allow her to send more money to her aunt in Oregon, who was ill and required expensive care. The reason was plausible. It was logical. But Marco felt there was more to it. He felt she was as drawn to this strange situation as he was, pulled by an invisible thread from the past. Her moving in was a quiet, efficient affair. A few boxes, mostly books. A small, framed photo of an older couple who must have been her parents. She arranged her new suite with a simple, understated grace. She asked for nothing. Her presence changed the atmosphere of the penthouse. It was still a fortress, but it was no longer a tomb. There was the smell of coffee in the mornings, the soft sound of music from his mother's room, the murmur of her voice. It was a dangerous kind of peace. A domesticity that felt both alien and achingly familiar. Marco began to alter his own routines. He found excuses to be in the main living area when he knew she would be passing through. He would ask her for updates on his mother, using the conversations as a chance to study her, to search for more clues. One evening, he found her on one of the balconies, looking out at the harbor. The wind was gentle, playing with loose strands of her hair. She did not seem to notice him approach. "The sea is beautiful tonight," he said, standing a few feet away. She startled, turning to face him. "Yes. It is." "Do you like the sea?" he asked. A simple question, but it was loaded. Elena had loved the sea. It was the centerpiece of the future he had promised her. Ilara hugged her arms to her chest, a defensive gesture. "I do. It always feels full of possibilities. And memories." "What kind of memories?" he pressed, his voice softer than he intended. She looked away from him, back towards the dark water. "Just old ones. From a different life." It feels like her voice was wistful, heavy with an unspoken story. "I grew up far from it. In Oregon. But I always dreamed of living near the ocean." He wanted to ask her. He wanted to grab her by the shoulders and demand to know if she remembered a boy who promised her a house by the sea. If she remembered a sapphire ring. But he couldn't. The risk was too great. If she was not Elena, he would look like a madman. If she was, and she was hiding it, there had to be a reason. A reason that might put her in danger if he exposed it. His patience was rewarded, and his fears confirmed, 2 days later. Leo entered his office, his face grim. He closed the door silently and stood before the desk. "Rizio," Leo said, his voice a low growl. He's back in the city. Made a quiet landing a week ago. He's been meeting with the old families. The ones who resent our control of the port. Marco felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. What is he planning? He's making a play. Trying to unite them against us. But that's not the worst of it. Leo paused, and Marco knew what was coming next would be the blow. Our surveillance on the nurse's old apartment. A man was there today. One of Rizzio's men. A bottom feeder named Frankie Gallo. He was asking the neighbors about her. Showed them her picture. The blood drained from Marco's face. Rizzio knew. Somehow, after all these years, he knew she was here. This was not a coincidence. It was a trap, and the spring was about to be sprung. Ilara was not the architect of the trap, she was the bait. And Rizzio had just taken a nibble. The 25-year-old mystery was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. Rizzio must have been the one who got to her back then. He must have been the one who forced her to leave. It was the only explanation that made sense. Rizzio had been his father's main rival. Taking Elena would have been a way to wound Marco, to distract him, to break him. And it had worked. Now he was back to finish the job. The time for questions, for subtlety, was over. The time for waiting had expired. The ghost had to act. Get the car ready, Marco commanded, his voice like ice. We are paying a visit to Mr. Gallo. And Leo, double the guard on my mother's room. Ilara is not to leave that suite. No one speaks to her. No one goes near her. She is on absolute lockdown until I return. What should I tell her? Leo asked. Tell her nothing, Marco said, walking to a locked cabinet in the wall. He entered a code, and the door opened to reveal a collection of items he had not touched in years. He reached in and took out a single, heavy piece of steel. Tell her I am handling a business matter. He was no longer just protecting a memory. He was protecting a life. Her life. And he would tear down anyone who threatened it. The rage he felt was cold and pure. It was an old rage, one he had buried with his love for Elena. Rizzio had not just stolen his future, he had corrupted his past. And now he was threatening to burn the present to the ground. Marco was going to burn him first. The plan was simple. Brutal. Efficient. There would be no ground war. Marco did not operate that way. He did not sever the head of the snake. He dissolved it from the inside out, until there was nothing left. Frankie Gallo was the first thread to pull. They found him in a dingy bar in the industrial district, a place that smelled of stale beer and desperation. Gallo was a low-level enforcer, a man whose ambition far outstripped his intelligence. He was holding court with a few other street rats, bragging. Marco and Leo entered through the back, silent as wraiths. The bartender saw them and his face went pale. He busied himself wiping down a glass that was already clean. The low chatter in the bar died, replaced by a thick, anxious silence. Gallo turned, his drunken smile faltering as he saw who was approaching. Marco didn't speak. He simply gestured with his head toward the back door. The message was clear. Gallo, sweating now, stumbled to his feet and followed. In the alley, flanked by overflowing dumpsters, the interrogation was brief. You were asking about a woman, Marco said, his voice dangerously calm. Leo stood behind Gallo, cutting off his only escape. I don't know what you're talking about, Gallo stammered, trying to project a bravado he did not feel. Marco took a step forward. The street lamp cast his face in shadow, making his eyes seem like black holes. Her name is Ilara Vance. You showed her picture to her neighbors. Why? Gallo's eyes darted around nervously. It was just a job. Rizzio's orders. He said to find out where she went. Why does Rizzio want her? Marco's voice was a whip crack. I don't know. I swear. He just said she was an old friend of yours. An old weakness. He found out she was working for you. Said it was a gift from God. His words, not mine. An old weakness. The words confirmed everything. This was about the past. This was Rizzio's final, cruel play. Where is he? Marco asked. Gallo was trembling now. I can't. He'd kill me. Marco looked at Leo. Leo simply shrugged. He is going to kill you anyway, Marco said flatly. The only question is how long it takes. You can tell me where he is, and this will be quick. Or you can remain silent, and my friend Leo will spend the rest of the night helping you find your voice. He is very persuasive. Gallo broke. He spilled everything. The location was a warehouse down by the old Cannery Row, a place Rizzio was using as a temporary headquarters to rally his new, fragile alliance. Thank you, Frankie, Marco said. He turned and started to walk away. You gonna let me go? Gallo asked, a pathetic hope in his voice. Marco stopped but did not turn back. You went near her. You put her name in your mouth. You made her a part of this. There is no letting you go. He walked out of the alley. He did not have to look back to know that Leo was handling the permanent resolution. One problem was solved. Now for the source. The assault on the warehouse was not an assault at all. It was an infiltration. Marco's team was small, only 6 men including himself and Leo. They were not thugs, they were soldiers. They moved with a chilling precision through the shadows of the decaying waterfront. They bypassed the clumsy patrols Rizzio had set up, disabling his men silently, one by one. No alarms were raised. No shots were fired. Marco found Rizzio in a brightly lit office on the warehouse's 2nd floor. He was an old man now, his face a roadmap of bitterness and envy. He was on the phone, his voice arrogant as he tried to bully one of the other family heads into joining his cause. Marco stepped into the room. Rizzio's 2 bodyguards reached for their weapons, but they were too slow. Leo and another of Marco's men were already on them, disarming them with brutal efficiency. Rizzio dropped the phone, his face a mask of shock and fury. Bellini. How? You have always been sloppy, Silvio, Marco said, walking slowly toward the desk. He placed his hands on the back of the chair opposite Rizzio and leaned forward slightly. You mistake noise for power. You're a dead man, Rizzio spat, trying to regain his composure. My men will. Your men are having a very bad night, Marco interrupted calmly. They will not be bothering you. Or me. Or anyone else. Ever again. The finality in Marco's tone seemed to finally break through Rizzio's arrogance. Fear crept into his eyes. What do you want? I want to talk about a girl named Elena, Marco said, and the name hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Rizzio paled. I don't know who you're talking about. Do not lie to me, Silvio. Not now. 25 years ago. A baker's daughter. You found her. You threatened her. You made her write a note and disappear. You took her from me. Each sentence was a hammer blow, delivered with the cold weight of a quarter-century of repressed rage. Rizzio's face contorted into a sneer. He saw he was cornered, and his fear turned to defiance. She was your weakness. Your father was getting old, and you were getting soft. Wasting your time with some little nobody. I did you a favor. I helped you become what you are. You took my life, Marco whispered, the words filled with a chilling venom. You buried the man I was supposed to be. And now, you came back for her. You found her again. You sent your dogs to sniff around her life. You were going to use her against me again. She's just a woman. Rizzio shouted, his voice cracking. It's just business. No, Marco said, his voice dropping to a near inaudible level. This was never business. This was personal. You took something that did not belong to you. And in my world, we have a simple rule for thieves. He looked at Rizzio, his eyes devoid of any emotion, any pity. He saw not a rival, not another boss, but a disease that had plagued his life for far too long. A disease that required a permanent cure. "You broke the rules, Silvio," Marco said softly. "You went after family. You went after the innocent. You put your hands on something that was mine." He did not need to raise his voice. He did not need to issue a direct command. His men knew what to do. He turned his back on Rizzio, a final, damning dismissal. He walked out of the office and did not look back. He did not need to witness the end. He just needed to know that the threat was gone. Permanently closed. As he walked out of the warehouse into the cool night air, he felt no triumph. No satisfaction. Just a vast, hollow emptiness. He had avenged the past, but it had not brought Elena back. It had not healed the wound. Now he had to go back to the penthouse. He had to face the woman with her voice and her eyes and a 25-year-old gap in her history. He had to face the ghost he had locked in his home. When Marco returned to the penthouse, it was nearly dawn. The city was a pale grey, sleeping under a blanket of mist. The silence in his home was different now. It was not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of anticipation. He went straight to his mother's suite. Leo had followed his orders perfectly. Two of his most trusted men stood outside the door, their expression stoic. They nodded as he approached. He pushed the door open gently. The room was dimly lit by a single, soft lamp. His mother was asleep, her breathing even and peaceful. In a chair beside the bed, Ilara was also asleep. Her head was tilted to the side, her book fallen into her lap. She looked exhausted, but even in sleep, there was a watchfulness about her. He stood there for a long moment, just looking at her. The woman who was and was not Elena. He had just dismantled a rival's empire to protect her. He had just ended a 25-year-old vendetta for her. And she had no idea. He walked over and gently took the book from her lap. It was the volume of Rilke's poetry. He placed it on the nightstand. His movement, slight as it was, caused her to stir. Her eyes fluttered open. They were hazy with sleep at first, then sharpened with alarm as she saw him standing over her. She sat up straight, her posture immediately defensive. "Mr. Bellini," she said, her voice a little rough from sleep. "Is everything all right?" "The guards, they wouldn't let me leave." "Everything is fine," he said, his voice softer than he had ever used with her. "There was a security concern. It has been dealt with." He pulled another chair over and sat down, facing her. The space between them felt charged, electric. This was it. The moment of truth. "I need to ask you some questions, Ilara," he began. "And I need you to be honest with me. Your safety may depend on it." Her eyes widened with fear. "My safety? I don't understand." "Portland," he said, the word dropping like a stone into the quiet room. "You were born there. But you weren't, were you?" She flinched, a small, almost imperceptible reaction, but he saw it. I don't know what you mean." "I know about the 2-year gap in your record," he continued, pressing gently. "After your parents died. 19 years old. You disappeared. Where did you go, Ilara?" Tears welled in her eyes. She shook her head, a silent plea for him to stop. But he couldn't. He had to know. "Please," she whispered. "Don't." "Was your name ever Elena?" he asked, and the name, his Elena, finally spoken between them, shattered the last of her composure. A sob escaped her lips. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. The sound broke his heart all over again. It was the confirmation he had both craved and dreaded. It was her. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before he gently touched her arm. She didn't pull away. "Elena," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "It's you." She finally lowered her hands, her face streaked with tears. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw not a professional nurse, but the girl he had lost. The fear in her eyes was ancient. "He found me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Rizzio. After all this time, he found me." "He can't hurt you anymore," Marco said, his voice a low, fierce promise. "He will never hurt anyone again." Her eyes searched his face, trying to understand. "What did you do?" "I did what was necessary," he said simply. "Tell me what happened." "All those years ago." "The note said you were leaving me." "He made me write it," she cried, the words tumbling out in a rush, a dam of secrets breaking. "Rizzio. He came to the apartment. He said if I didn't leave you, he would kill you. He said he would make it look like an accident, and that he would kill my parents too. He knew everything about me. I was so scared. I didn't know what to do. I thought I was protecting you." He closed his eyes, the pain of her words a physical blow. All these years, he had thought she had abandoned him. He had let that belief turn him into a cold, empty shell. But she had left to save him. Her departure was not an act of betrayal. It was an act of love. The ultimate sacrifice. "He gave me money," she continued, her voice choked with shame. "He told me to run, to change my name, to never come back. I went as far as I could. I heard later that my parents, they died in an accident. I always wondered if he did it anyway." "He didn't," Marco said, his voice rough. "It was a true accident. I made sure of it at the time. It was the one piece of your old life I could still watch over." She stared at him, fresh tears streaming down her face. "You watched over them." "Always," he said. He finally understood. She had become a nurse. She had dedicated her life to caring for the sick and the dying because she had been robbed of the chance to care for the people she loved. And her taking this job, it wasn't a coincidence. "Why did you come back?" he asked gently. "Why take this job? You must have known it was me." She wiped her eyes, taking a shaky breath. "My aunt is sick. I needed the money. The agency said it was a high-paying, discreet client. They never used your name. But when I saw the address, I knew. I had to see you. Just once. I thought I could come, do my job, and you would never recognize me. I just wanted to see that you were okay." The irony was devastating. They had both been ghosts, haunting the edges of each other's lives, separated by a lie orchestrated by a bitter old man. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch clumsy after so many years. "I am not okay, Elena. I have not been okay since the day you left." In that moment, in the quiet room with his sleeping mother, the years fell away. He was not the ghost, the feared crime boss. He was just Marco. And she was not Ilara, the quiet nurse. She was his Elena. The missing piece of his soul. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. A silent communion of two broken people, finally finding their way back to each other. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "There is nothing to forgive," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "You saved my life." "I knew," she said, looking up at him, her eyes full of a love he thought he would never see again, "just saved mine." Later, after the tears had subsided and a fragile peace had settled between them, she asked him the question that had been hovering in the air. "Marco," she said, her hand now resting in his. "All this, the things you do. Your life. Are you a bad man?" He looked at their joined hands, then at his sleeping mother, and finally at her. His gaze was heavy with the weight of his past, but also lit by the hope of a future. "I have done bad things to protect the people I love," he answered, his voice low and honest. "Tonight, I was whatever I needed to be to keep you safe. For you, Elena. I would be anything." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. From a hidden compartment, he carefully extracted a small, worn object. It was a faded photograph of a young, laughing girl, and beside it, a simple, elegant sapphire ring. He had carried it every day for 25 years. He held it out to her. I believe this belongs to you." Her gasp was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock and joy. The promise, once broken, was now renewed. In the quiet of the coming dawn, a new life was beginning. He offered her his protection, not as a boss, but as the man who had never stopped loving her. A business card with a single number. His personal line. A promise of a safe harbor, forever. 1 year later. The penthouse was different. The fortress had become a home. Laughter, a sound long absent, now echoed softly in the halls. Sofia Bellini had good days and bad, but her good days were more frequent. She had a constant companion in Elena, who cared for her not as a nurse, but as a daughter. Marco was different, too. The hard edges were still there, the authority in his voice was undiminished, but the coldness in his eyes had thawed. He spent less time in his office and more time in the sunlit living room, listening to his mother and Elena talk. He was slowly, carefully, disentangling himself from the empire he had built. Leo was being groomed to take over, to run the legitimate side of the businesses. The ghost was fading, and Marco Bellini was re-emerging. He never wore the sapphire ring. It sat in a small velvet box on Elena's dresser. She said she didn't need to wear it. She knew the promise was real this time. One afternoon, Marco stood in his old, Spartan office, which was now being converted into a small library for his mother. Workers were installing shelves. He was looking at the last empty wall when Elena came in. She held a small, framed object in her hands. It was a simple, pressed flower. A daisy, faded with age, preserved under glass. "I found this in one of my old books," she said softly. "You gave it to me on our first picnic." He took it from her, his fingers tracing the delicate, brittle petals. He remembered the day perfectly. The sun on her hair. The sound of her laugh. A moment of pure, uncomplicated happiness. He had kept the ring. She had kept the flower. For 25 years, they had each held a piece of the other, waiting. He hung the framed flower on the wall. It was the only decoration in the room. A small, quiet memento of a love that had survived time, distance, and the darkness of men's hearts. It was a testament to the fact that even in the most hardened soul, a single voice, a single memory, could plant a seed of redemption. True strength is not the ability to build walls around your heart, but the courage to tear them down for the one person who holds the key. For Marco, that key was not power or fear, but the sound of a voice he thought he had lost forever. It was a reminder that love, true love, does not fade with time. It simply waits, patiently, for a chance to come home. And sometimes, the greatest act of a powerful man is not to conquer the world, but to finally surrender a piece of his own.